Good evening, everybody. I am Devdashni Murugan from first year MPharmacy Pharmacology Department. I'm going to deal about endocrine system and inflammatory diseases. These are the contents that we are going to discuss today about the major endocrine glands like hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal, and pancreatic and gonadal hormones, along with inflammatory diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and gout. Briefly about NSAIDs. Coming to endocrine system is a chemical control system where ductless endocrine glands are present. These release hormones which are chemical messengers. These are generally secreted into the blood, and using the bloodstream they affect the target organs. The major difference between endocrine gland and an exocrine gland is a presence of duct that can be seen in this picture. The below one is an exocrine gland where a separate duct is present, through which the secretions are transported to the targeted organs, whereas in an endocrine system, around the gland there are blood vessels, and into the blood vessels the secretion is done. Can anyone name a mixed gland like with? Yeah, it has both a duct and majorly the questions are asked on about what are the types of hormones like peptide, steroidal, amino acid derivatives and fatty acid derivatives, and in that the number of amino acids present in an hormone is generally asked, like can anyone name the amino acids present in insulin? Yeah, like that. Basic questions are only asked, so don't get panic and write it. It will be majorly correct. So can anyone tell the difference between a steroid derivative hormone and a fatty acid derivative hormone?
Steroid hormone contains steroid release, whereas fatty acid means triglycerides.
Yeah, fatty acid has triglycerides and steroid is from cholesterol. And the major functions of endocrine system are given here, like maintenance of internal homeostasis, support of cell growth, cognitive development, cognitive reproduction, fertility, sexual function, facilitative response to external stimuli, etc. This can be asked. Coming to the mechanism, a basic biological need is recognized, and through after recognition, the hormone is generally secreted out. Biosynthesis of hormone and storage is done in the gland, and when it's secreted, it goes through blood and reaches the target organ, where the required modifications are done in the target organ, causing the required effects. And after that, feedback mechanism is sent to that gland by not recognizing the need anymore, because the need is rectified, and then the extra hormone is degenerated. This is the basic mechanism for all glands. Coming to hypothalamus, it is a part of brain, and it acts as a connection between both nervous system and endocrine system. The nervous system signals is converted into chemical messages by this hypothalamus. It is also called as master of master gland. Can anyone name what's the master gland? Yeah. And the basic hormones released by hypothalamus is mentioned in this table. There are 6 hormones from hypothalamus. The first one is corticotropic releasing hormone, next gonadotropin releasing hormone. These basically the questions are asked on what are the targets of the hormones, what are the pathways used by the hormones, and what are the functions. These are mainly under human anatomy and physiology, and one main point is prolactin inhibitory hormone, which is dopamine. Dopamine is also a neurotransmitter, so that might be asked very frequently. You can go through the hormones through this table and the targets. Coming to and to that, can you see that image? In that, hypothalamus and pituitary are there. Hypothalamus, the larger lobe is the anterior pituitary. Hypothalamus works on anterior lobe through blood vessels. Like, can you see the nerves? The nerves are over there. Up. The nerves are directly connected to the blood vessels over there on the right, left top corner. The blood vessels, the neurotransmitters are generally into the blood vessels, and the blood vessels come to the pituitary gland in the lobe, and the pituitary gland releases the hormones that needs to be released. Whereas coming to posterior pituitary, directly the neurons are connected to the blood vessels of the posterior pituitary. So here, due to its connection through blood vessels, the anterior pituitary is called as neurohyposis, adenohyposis, and the posterior pituitary is called as neurohyposis. This might be a point. Coming to anterior pituitary hormones, pituitary gland is called as the master gland. The hormones released are uh, adenocorticotropic hormone, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormones, and prolactins. Uh, the cells which uh, release these hormones are mentioned in the brackets. Those might be asked. And the targets are mentioned next to it. And the disorders when the secretion is higher or low. Coming to when hypersecretion of adenocorticotropic hormone, hypertrophy is seen. Hypertrophy means enlargement of glands, and when low hyposecretion of adenocorticotropic hormone is seen, adrenal atrophy is seen. Atrophy means degeneration of the gland. In similar ways, the hypo and hypersecretion conditions are mentioned in the disorders column. When coming to luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, they both are gonadotropins, and they both provide similar effects when hypo and hyper. So I have mentioned hyper in luteinizing section and hypo in follicle stimulation hormone section. You could go through that. Similarly, differences in females and males are also be mentioned in that in there. And the gigantism is seen in children when hypersecretion of growth hormone is seen, and in adults acromegaly is seen. And LLS is the other name of dwarfism, which is Levy-Lorenz syndrome. Okay. Similarly, the thyroid stimulating hormone, these are the general disorders produced. Cretinism and myxoedemia is produced by hyper, and goiter is produced by low. Goiter is also produced by thyroid hormones, and these are the drugs that act on anterior pituitary hormone secretions. You could see the mechanism of action and side effects of these drugs, and the receptors on which they are acting, the contraindications, etc. You could go through this classification later. Coming to pars intermediate and posterior pituitary hormones, melanocyte stimulating hormone is released by pars intermedia. Pars intermedia is a intermediate layer between anterior and posterior pituitary. This acts on melanocytes and hypothalamus. While acting on melanocytes, it produces a pigment called melanin, and while acting on hypothalamus, it controls appetite. Therefore, during hypersecretion, it produces hypopigmentation, and during lower secretions, it produces obesity, as it cannot control the appetite, and it may also lead to eating disorders like bulimia, etc. And oxytocin and vasopressin are released by posterior pituitary gland, and these act on those respective targets, and that's the pathway that is used, GQ IP3. It acts on GQ receptor and using IP3 secondary messengers. When vasopressin is hypersecreted, it causes a syndrome called syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone. And when low secreted, it causes diabetic insipidus. Coming to Thyroid. The major hormones produced by thyroids are thyroxine and triiodothyronine. Uh, oh, uh, the inactive one is T4 and the active one is T3. Mm, the biosynthesis of this hormone is very important, and which one is active and which one is not. Using the biosynthesis, you could easily understand the drugs acting on them, the thyroid inhibitors. And coming to calcitonin and parathyroid hormones, they are physiologically antagonists to each other. That could be a question. And calcitonin generally causes osteoporosis in elderly women, and hypocalcemia is produced by parathyroid hormone, and those are the thyroid inhibitors. When coming to thyroid biosynthesis, I'll explain it in a general line. Iodide ion is used. This iodide is taken into the gland and it is converted into iodine, and this iodine is grabbed by thyroid globulin, and it is from DIT, iodothyrosin and diiodothyrosin are formed. These are combined and form when two DITs form combined, they form T4. One DIT and one MIT form triiodine T3. Uh, in that uh, in that biosynthesis pathway, these hormones work by not uh, producing the hormone synthesis and by inhibiting the iodide, the trapping, the hormone release inhibition, and destroying the thyroid tissues. And like this, the thyroid inhibitors are used. Coming to adrenal hormones, these are the adrenal hormones. Uh, Adrenal is of two parts, medulla and cortex. From medulla, adrenaline and noradrenaline is released, whereas glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids are released from cortex, and the targets are mentioned there. Mainly the disorders formed by glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids are very frequently asked questions, and the drugs used by used in place of corticosteroids are mentioned here. And coming to the disorders, like phaeochromocytochrome phaeochromocytochrome is an adrenal cancer. Uh, you can see that in ANS too, about those adrenal receptors and stuff. That's an important point. And pancreatic hormones, everyone knows it, insulin, glycagon, somatostatin. And somatostatin is also produced by, we came to just now, I did not mention it, but it was there in the previous slide. Anyone? Hypothalamus. It inhibits growth hormone. Yeah. And coming to the disorders, diabetes mellitus, sure, polycystic ovary syndrome, insulinoma, and coming to glucagons disorders, high levels of glucagons, same symptoms as diabetes. And somatostatin, you may go through gallstones and stelohoria. Coming to the drugs related to pancreatic hormones, insulin. When in diabetes mellitus, you see low levels of insulin, so insulin analogs are used. These are the categories: rapid acting, short acting, intermediate acting, and long acting. Coming to oral anti-diabetic drugs, these are also used to decrease the glucose levels in an diabetic patient. Uh, Using the mechanism of actions, the classification is seen, and the side effects are also required for you to study. Coming to the mechanism of action, uh, sulfonylurea and acts on the potassium channels, blocking them, causing depolarization and increasing in calcium levels, due to which insulin secretion increases. Uh, Due to high insulin secretions, the glucose uptake levels increases. furtherly decreasing the glucose levels in blood. Similarly, other drugs are mentioned in the yellow boxes, and the mechanism of actions are briefly mentioned through arrows. Coming to the next topic, gonadal hormones. These hormones are secreted by the paths mentioned in the brackets. Estrogen is released by Graafian follicle. Similarly, progesterone is released by corpus luteum, and testosterone is released by Leydig cells. Prostaglandin is released by uterus, and their targets are mentioned, their functions too, and their disorders. Coming to the biosynthesis of gonadal and adrenal hormones, this is an interesting pathway. Here, the 5 alpha reductase, which is used for conversion of testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, is important, as well as the aldosterone and cortisols. Um, Coming to the drugs which are similar to androgens and related drugs, you could go through the classification here, and the drugs used for erectile dysfunction too. And coming to the mechanism of action of the drugs related to androgens, uh, the gonadotropic releasing hormone agonists and antagonists work on hypothalamus. Agonist increases the activity of increase has a similar activity of gonadotropin releasing hormone, therefore increases the hormone's activity, thereby increasing the levels of FSH and LH. Similarly, ketoconazole and abitron acts on Leydig cells by inhibiting the formation of testosterone, and 5-alpha reductase inhibitors inhibit the formation of dihydrotestosterone, which do not act on androgen receptors. Uh, the anti-androgens, which act on androgen receptor inhibitors, are mentioned here. Coming to drugs used in erectile dysfunction, they act on the phosphodiesterase 5 enzyme, which converts cyclic GMP into GMP. If cyclic GMP is present in the body, you can see erection. Otherwise, it is not present. Therefore, that enzyme is inhibited. Um, Coming to estrogen and related drugs, the classification is briefly mentioned here. You could go through it, and the side effects too. Never forget the side effects. Coming to progestins too. Mechanism of action of the estrogen drugs is shown in the slide. Similar to the androgens, gonadotropic releasing hormones agonists and antagonists are acting on the hypothalamus, and the ones different here is aromatase inhibitors, which act on the aromatase enzyme which converts testosterone into estradiol. And coming to SCRMs, selective estrogen regulators, you can see it here, estrogen receptor regulator and receptor modulators. These act on the estradiol. Uh, when coming to modulators, it can act as an agonist, and it can up regulate or down regulate. Coming to down regulators, it decreases the activity of estradiol. These are the classification of hormonal contraceptives and uterine stimulants and uterine relaxants. Uh, these are uterine stimulants and are used in gestation during labor. Oxytocin is the generally used drug. Coming to inflammation, inflammation is a defensive mechanism of our body in the immune system. It is the first response of the immune system. When inflammation is seen, prostaglandins are present near it. They are group of lipids at the tissue damage area, which causes inflammation, blood flow, and the formation of blood clots. Major inflammatory diseases are rheumatoid arthritis, gout, irregular bowel syndrome. Psoriasis is also an inflammatory disease. The mechanism of prostaglandin formation is seen there. Membrane phospholipids is converted into arachidonic acid, and arachidonic acid is converted into prostaglandins. which in turn forms inflammation. Coming to NSAID's very famous classification, the easiest one so far, non-selective COX inhibitors, preferentially COX-2 inhibitors, and selective COX-2 inhibitors. You could go through it afterwards. Coming to the mechanism of action, the corticosteroids acts on the phospholipase A, inhibiting the arachidonic acid formation, whereas NSAIDs act on COX, stopping prostaglandin formation. Coming to rheumatoid arthritis is formed due to prostaglandins like IL-1, IL-6, interleukins 1, interleukin 6, TNF alpha, uh, and other acting on the synovial tissue lining, causing inflammation in the synovial tissue joints. And this is the treatment used. Generally, drug treatments are DMARDs, disease modifying anti-rheumatic drugs. Here, biological drugs are TNF alpha, um, inhibitors, interleukin 1 and interleukin 6 inhibitors, and JAK inhibitors. Adjuvant drugs are corticosteroids. Those are used on T beta cells. Coming to anti-gout, gout is generally because of elevated levels of uric acid in the joints, mostly seen in the toes of your legs. Here, the mechanism of gout is purine metabolites form into hypoxanthine, and hypoxanthine is converted into xanthine, further into uric acid. Uric acid crystals get accumulated in your joints, forming gout. Here, those are the drugs used in gout, and they act on the xanthine oxidase by inhibiting it and inhibiting the formation of uric acid. And choline and NSAIDs, they act on the inflammation that is caused due to the elevated levels of uric acid. That's it for today. All the best. Thank you.